to the Free Kick Podcast. My name is Todd. I hope you guys are having a great weekend. And I guess it all depends on when you guys are listening to this podcast. So maybe you guys are listening to this podcast on Monday. And by that time, you guys will know if the Philadelphia Eagles have won the Super Bowl or not against the Kansas City Chiefs. But if you guys are listening to this podcast before the Super Bowl, go Birds. Hopefully the Eagles can get that W in the Super Bowl against the Kansas City Chiefs. I know that would make a ton of you listeners extremely happy to see Philadelphia, after two of the sports teams make it to a final, they lose it. And now here the Eagles are in the Super Bowl. They have a chance to redeem the whole city. And so hopefully the Eagles win the Super Bowl and the whole city of Philadelphia can be quite happy, because it's been a fantastic year if you're a Philadelphia sports fan, with the Phillies, with the Union, and now the Eagles in the final. And I can't imagine if the Eagles do wind up losing that Super Bowl. There's going to be a lot of people that aren't happy. I mean, I know how I felt when the Union lost the final against LAFC, but some of you listeners, you guys are 5-for-5 fans, and to see three teams lose a final, I mean, that would be gut-wrenching for some of you guys. So hopefully that's not the case. And like I said, you guys that are listening to this podcast on a Monday, hopefully it's good news. The Eagles have won the Super Bowl. But, I want to be transparent with you guys, because there's always been a lot of people complaining on social media about, the Union, they never stream the press conferences. The Union aren't really upfront with us. And I guess that is partially true, because, I do remember when the Union would stream those press conferences and everything on Twitter. And I think towards the end of the season, they started streaming them again on YouTube. But, if you guys check out the website, PhiladelphiaUnion.com, they do post the midweek and the after-game press conferences a couple hours or maybe a day after they happen. So, it's not live like some of you guys would want, but the option is there. And so I know I told you guys when Kevin Kincaid and I did our 2-episode, one on his podcast, one on mine, I said, okay, I'm not going to give you guys another episode until I do my season predictions. And I thought, why not be transparent with you guys? Because there was a lot of great conversations in Thursday's press conference with Jim Curtin. And so I wanted to go ahead, play some of those clips. I think I have a total of 5 clips for you guys to listen to. I'll give my thoughts, but once again, I mean, Jim Curtin was in a fantastic mood in his press conference, and maybe that's because the season's about to start here in 14 days. Maybe it's because the team's undefeated so far in preseason. Maybe it's because they're down in Florida and the warmth. Maybe it's all of the above. But regardless of why Jim Curtin was in a great mood again, a lot of great things discussed, like I said. And Jim Curtin started off his press conference talking about how they played different formations against New England. And you guys saw it, I'm sure, on Twitter, on Facebook, or if you were following the live blog, where the Union posted the lineup sheet and they lined up in a 3-5-2 formation against New England. You had Jack McGlynn and Jose Martinez in the double pivot. You had Jacob Glesnes, Brendan Craig, and Jack Elliott as your 3 center backs. And this is exactly what Jim Curtin said he was going to do early in preseason, where when they play the Eastern Conference teams, they're going to try different things out. And what better team to do that against than New England, a team that I feel like we played, 14, 15 times in the last 3 years? I mean, we've played New England so many times. So they know what to expect when we play a diamond formation. But when you come out in a 3-5-2, it's a look that they haven't seen. And Jim Curtin said, I'm not giving the players a ton of information. We're giving them minimum information saying this is what we want. Go out there and let's see if it works or not. And Jim Curtin said he was super impressed with the 3-5-2 formation. Jim said that they eventually went back to the Christmas tree formation that they tried here a few seasons ago, the 4-3-2-1, playing with 2 10s. And I think that's something we can see this year, whether it be Daniel Gazdag and Torres, or you throw Quinn Sullivan in there. You guys heard Jim Curtin on this podcast when he said Andres Pereira could also play as one of the 10. So, there's a lot of different options, lots of versatile players in this team, and that gives you options to try different formations. And going back to the 3-5-2, I think that formation where you're playing with the 2-6s, the double pivots, where you have Jack McGlynn lining up next to Jose Martinez. You let Jose Martinez do all the defensive work, cover the back line, cover Jack McGlynn, where Jack McGlynn, now you get the best out of him, where he can just spray balls around the field, where he can play those threaded passes, where he can really pick teams apart. And that's all you need him to do, is just sit next to a player that's like Jose Martinez, that is Jose Martinez, that's going to do the defensive work. And now Jack McGlynn, he can be that playmaker. He can be your Andres Pirlo, where he was so vital for Juventus and AC Milan, where he would just sit in that role, picking out passes. And he's one of the best playmakers ever in the game. And not saying Jack McGlynn is going to be like Pirlo, but he does have similar characteristics as him. And so to see him play in a 3-5-2, I think that's just going to elevate Jack McGlynn's game even further. And we saw Jack McGlynn sign a new contract extension with the Union, where he has options for the 2026 and 2027 season. And I know fans are like, why would he want to resign with the Union? Well, look, he's doing the Union a solid, where he signs a long-term contract, where now the Union can get even more money for Jack McGlynn because he signed that long-term contract. And if you play Jack McGlynn in a formation that he thrives in, if he continues to show that, look, he's a great upcoming player, that's only going to raise his market value. So he's raising his value by signing that long-term contract extension, and now you play him in a 3-5-2 formation, that's only going to take his game higher, raising the value that the Union can get for him. And don't be surprised if Jack McGlynn becomes the most expensive player the Union sell. And maybe that will be Julian Carranza, but at least homegrown. Jack McGlynn, I think, will definitely pass the fee that the Union got for Brendan and Paxton Aronson, as well as Mark McKenzie. But like I said, trying these different formations out, it gives the Union versatility. It gives them different options. And that's exactly what Jim Curtin mentioned in his long press conference on Thursday afternoon.
We have guys that are versatile also, which helps. So, a guy like Kai Wagner can get a lot more advanced as a left wing back, but he can also probably play quite comfortably as a left center back. Matt Real is another guy who has great attacking qualities and maybe has a little more protection with the third center back there. So these are all things that will come up during the season. As it pertains to the midfield specifically, you have, I'll say our deepest midfield we've ever had. That's pretty clear. We have, we're 8 or 9 deep in that midfield, and there's really good players that you almost have to throw some of them as strikers occasionally just to keep everyone happy and get everybody minutes. So it's a good problem for a coach to have. Like I said, we're going to need that freshness, but whether you play a 5-man midfield, a diamond midfield, 2 6s and 2 10s. Sometimes we really have to experiment with that, and it's our job as a staff to, bring the players' strengths out and hide our weaknesses, which we've done a decent job of through the preseason so far.
Yeah, and you love to hear that the team, the coaches, they're trying different things out. They're trying to get the best out of their players. They're trying to maximize their players' potential. And it was interesting hearing Jim Curtin say Kai Wagner could potentially play as the left center back if you play 3 in the back, which I think Kai had to play as a center back when we played Pachuca in the summer friendly. I didn't go to that game, but I know the Union were short in numbers, and I think they only had Jack Elliott and Jacob Glesnes as their 2 center backs. So then Each center back got 45 minutes in that game, and so Kai Wagner had to go in as a left center back, I believe, in that game. But I don't know. I mean, he's a left-footed player. You guys have heard me talk about it on this podcast, where I do think there is a need for a left-footed center back. Kai Wagner could do it, but Jack Elliott does it well. I mean, he's a right-footed player, and we talked about it with Kevin Kincaid. He makes it look so natural playing as the left center back, even though he's right-footed. But like Jim said, I mean, our deepest position on this team is in the midfield. And there's going to be players missing out on the 20-man roster on game days. That's a fact. And I'm sure the coaching staff's going to look at the opponents each week, and they're going to have that decide who's going to make the bench. They'll for sure take into account how the players are performing in training during the week. And like Jim Curtin says all the time, the hardest thing isn't keeping the starting 11 motivated, the first 20 guys motivated. It's keeping players 21 through 25 engaged with the team, letting them know that they can get called on at any time, that they need to be ready. And Jim Curtin and his staff have done a good job with that. When I look at the roster as it stands, I think I have 16 locks on my roster with your regular starting 11, if we're staying in the 4-4-2 diamond with Andre Blake, Kai Wagner, Jack Elliott, Glesnes, Bizo, Martinez, Flock, Bedoya, Gazdag, Ua, and Carranza. And then the other locks for the bench, I would say Joaquin Torres, Damian Lowe, Jack McGlynn, Pereira, and Joe Bendick. And so then that leaves you with 4 open spots. And typically what the Union were doing during the season, they always had a goalkeeper, that's a given, whether it be Matt Freese or Joe Bendick, but sometimes they would go with either 2 strikers and 3 midfielders on the bench with 3 defenders, or they would go 1 striker with 4 midfielders and 3 defenders. And so that leaves, if we go with my 16 locks that I just told you guys, that leaves 4 open spots for players between Donovan, Sullivan, Jeremy Raffanella, Nate Harriel, Matt Real, Brendan Craig, Anton Sorensen, Richard Adada, and Jesus Bueno. And so I think, you probably have to go with a total of 1 goalkeeper, 1 striker, 4 midfielders, and 3 defenders. But again, like I said, it's probably going to depend on who the Union play that week. It's going to depend on how the players are performing in training. I mean, there's a ton of different options how you can go with making your 20-man roster. But again, it's like those players that don't make the 20-man bench, they're going to be upset. They're going to be pissed. And it's up to Jim Curtin and the coaching staff to keep doing a good job to keep those players motivated, to let them know, hey, look, at any given moment, you're going to have a chance. And one player in particular that Jim Curtin mentioned was Jesus Bueno. And he talked about just, again, how deep this midfield is and how players are going to be mad when they find out that they're not starting or they're not in the game day roster.
I'll use Jesus as an example of the way the mentality of our players has to shift this year, because we are so deep in the midfield, in the back line, in the striker position. There's going to be moments where guys are going to be mad that they're not starting. And I want players to be mad. I want them to be mad that they're not starting and getting 90 minutes. But I used Jesus as the example for last year, who trained hard every day, was a professional every day, wanted more than anybody to win the final. He was such a great teammate all year long. He now takes an off season, pushes himself in a way that probably was above and beyond his starting points the previous year, has come in incredibly fit, and has played amazing, not just because he's scoring goals, but in training each day, he's had the right mentality and mindset. And he's a great professional. He's deserving of minutes right now. It's still a really tough competition in that midfield for sure to get minutes, but his mindset and mentality more than anything is what I want every player to have. And that is, when you're called upon, if it's for 90 minutes, be ready for 90. If it's for 60 minutes, be ready for 60. If it's literally for 2 minutes to close out the game, know what that entails and come with the energy that Jesus has come with every day. So I think they got that message, but he's certainly having a really good preseason and is a great teammate and, a great example for our guys and how to have the right mentality.
And that is one thing that sucks with the team not broadcasting the games, which Jim Curtin mentioned, that if it was up to the union, they would broadcast everything. They don't care what people see, and some teams don't want people to see what they're doing in training camp, which is ridiculous. I feel like Kevin and I talked about this on my podcast when we did it, part 2 on my show, and we don't need to get into that conversation again. But yeah, it's a joke that we can't stream preseason matches where whatever the reason is, whether it's Apple, whether it's teams don't want to do it, it's a joke. And we only have the information that's given to us from the match day blogs, which isn't a ton of information. So, you judge Jesus Bueno on his goals that he scored. And, there's a lot more to just scoring goals. But, yeah, he has scored a couple goals this season. And it's good to see Jesus come into training camp, to see him sharp, to see him fit, to really pushing for minutes. He's a player who scored 6 goals last season with Union 2. I think he's a player that, like Jim said, is deserving of minutes. I am curious to see what exactly we have in him. And when I was talking about my locks, he isn't a lock for me just because we have so many other players that could potentially make that bench. But if the season started today with the way that he's playing in preseason, yeah, of course, Jesus would be a lock, a guarantee on the bench. Not saying he's a guaranteed starter. I mean, it's going to be hard for some of these players to take starting spots away from Leon Flock, from L.A. Bedoya. But with all the games we have, we will see rotations. So I think players will get plenty of opportunities this season. So I'm not too worried about that. But for the sake of our starting 11, our regular starting 11, I find it hard for someone like Jesus or Joaquin Torres to break into that starting 11, where our regular starting 11 last season was just so dominant, where they were just so good. So I think Jesus coming in with that mindset of, I'm going to surpass all the expectations that the team set for us players in the offseason. I'm going to surpass all of that. I'm going to come in the sharpest in preseason. I'm going to show that I'm deserving of minutes. And to have that mentality to say, look, I deserve a spot on this bench. I deserve a spot in the starting 11. And Jim said, the players, they've started to react to that mentality too. And, when one person is showing that energy, it's not hard to infect the whole squad with that. And we talk about it all the time, where it's such a tight-knit group with this team, where Ernst Tanner isn't signing players just on their potential. He's looking at, okay, how are they going to fit in with this locker room? And again, it just seems like Ernst Tanner, whether it be Jesus, whether it be Damian Lowe, whether it be Joaquin Torres or Andres Pereira, Ernst Tanner is finding players that are talented, but he's also finding players that are going to fit in well with this locker room. And so it's good to see Jesus pushing his teammates with the same mentality that he has so far this preseason. Chris Donovan broke his nose, for you guys that saw the picture of him in that face shield. Jim Curtin told us. He said that he had to get surgery to fix his septum, and he can't start having contact until next week, but he'll be able to play in the last 2 preseason matches versus Nashville and Colorado. So, yeah, I was curious about, okay, what's going on with Chris, because it's never a good thing when you see a player in a face shield, and Jim even said that, he played through the pain of a broken nose with the shield on, and then they did more x-rays and said, oh, you've got to get surgery to clean up the mess in your nose. And so it's good that Chris Donovan's able to have contact next week that he'll be able to play in the last 2 preseason matches, because we will need Chris Donovan during the season. I mean, we only have 3 actual strikers on this roster, and Chris Donovan, I think, is going to get a lot of minutes. And I told you guys before that I think Chris Donovan's going to have a better season. Would it shock me if he has the same productivity as Corey Burke? No, because he's that kind of player that's motivated. And you give him year 2 in the system, he knows what it takes to play in MLS. I think we're going to see a better version of Chris Donovan this season. And so a couple more updates that Jim Curtin gave us before we end the podcast. I'm sure you guys have saw the news that Abasa has had his contract terminated with the Union. And that only leaves the Union now with 4 center backs on the roster, with Glesnes, Elliott, Craig, and Damian Lowe. And so Jim Curtin was asked, okay, well, with Abasa off the roster, will you guys go ahead and push to sign another center back?
Yeah, it's a good question. You know, we went pretty hard after a young prospect in the USL. I think you guys are aware of who that is, and no, it's always good to have a good stable of young talent coming up and pushing. Am I happy? You know, last year we really we finished the season with kind of 3 healthy ones. So you're rolling the dice a little bit. I'll knock on wood here and say, you know, fortunately, guys like Jack Elliott and Jacob Glesnes are kind of warriors and can play a lot of minutes and have been able to dodge injury because they take such good care of their body. Obviously, Brandon Craig's had a good preseason so far, and Damian Lowe has come in and been really impressive as well. So I like that stable of 4. You're always an injury away from getting thin, but I think every team's in that same boat. So I really like the group that we have. But certainly, you look to your academy. There's some good young ones coming up there. But it's not a position right now where I think we need to actively go out and add another. I'm pretty comfortable with that stable of 4 guys. Always got to stay healthy, though, as you know.
That's a key, right, for this team is, the depth looks good. But as soon as injuries start happening, then that depth disappears. And so let's hope that the team can continue to stay healthy. They've been healthy the last couple of years. So let's hope that continues. But, eventually I feel like your luck's going to run out. That's just what it is. But for the player that you guys don't know who Jim Curtin was talking about, the player that they were scouting heavily, that they try to bring in from the USL, that was Josh Winder from Louisville City. He's a 17-year-old center back. He's played with the US U19s. He's a fantastic prospect. He's been linked to Benfica. Apparently was way too complicated for the Union to make a deal happen because of territorial rights and everything. And so it sucks because it's the same reason why the Union have lost a couple guys from their academy overseas because of rights and whatnot. And because of that, then MLS misses out on money. I mean, that is what it is. And so MLS loves making money. And I feel like they've got to do something about making it that much more complicated to sign players in these different leagues in America, where Josh Winder would be a fantastic signing for the Union. He's been a fantastic player with Louisville City, and it's only a matter of time before he leaves the USL and goes overseas, because it looks like it's impossible for him to sign with an MLS club because of all the stupid rules and restrictions in place and people fighting over territorial rights. So, the Union pushed. It was good to hear Jim Curtin admit that they pushed hard to try to sign this kid. But then Damian Lowe fell in their lap, and they're comfortable with their 4 center backs that they do have on the roster. And with Abasa now gone, that leaves 2 open international spots open for the Union. And I didn't get a chance to ask, okay, did the Union plan on selling one of those spots? Could they potentially fill both of those spots? Because as we all know, you can make some serious money in GAM if you sell international roster spots. All teams start out with 8. You can have less, you can have more by trading for them, but each season you start with 8. And so it does the Union no good if they feel like, okay, we're not going to fill these 2 spots, and they leave them empty, it does the union no good just keeping them doing nothing with them. So, I mean, if there's an opportunity for the union to sell at least one of them and get GAM, and they can use that GAM towards next season, maybe this season, to bring in another player that doesn't require an international spot, maybe they do that. But, it does give the union more options to bring in more money if they, in fact, want to bring in more players. But the position they won't bring in is a center back, unless, of course, a injury happens, like Jim Curtin said. So 2 more for you guys, and then I'll let you go. And again, hopefully the Eagles win the Super Bowl. Go Birds. But Matt Freese was traded to New York City, and I don't think that we talked about that on this podcast. And Jim Curtin just gave his thoughts on what Matt Freese has meant to the union and what he sees Matt Freese doing with New York City.
With Matt, there's a personal relationship there too. He's been a kid that's, been in this club since the very beginning, in the academy, worked his tail off to become a professional, played some great games for us, won some great games for us. Was a great person, intelligent kid. And sometimes it gets to a point where I can't continue to tell him to just be patient. It's not enough. I felt guilty every time I'd say it to him each year. And sometimes in pro sports, it's unfortunate that you happen to play behind the best player in the league at your position, in Andre Blake. So almost morally and ethically, I wanted to do what's best for the kid to give him a chance to start. Do I wish it was not in New York City? Probably. But at the same time, because I know how talented Matt is, at the same time, that was a real chance for him to get a number 1 job. And our job as coaches, sometimes, of course, winning is priority number 1, but there is a human element in doing the right thing for a kid. That's dream is to be a starting goalkeeper in this league. Sometimes everything doesn't align perfectly, and we couldn't ship him out to the Western Conference. So, look, Matt's a great kid, and we wanted to do right by him. I know he's going to have a great career there, and I hope he plays bad against the Union, though.
Hey, I'm with Jim. I hope Matt plays well, except for when it's against the Union. But, I think that just talks about the mentality of this team, right? They wanted to do right by Matt. And you've seen them do it with both Aronson brothers, with Mark McKenzie, where they didn't accept the highest offer for these players. They looked at, okay, where can we send them where they're going to continue to develop? Because the Union, once they sell players, they want to see these players continue to reach their highest potential. And to see the team say, you know what, we know we're going to have to face Matt Freese, and it sucks selling him to the Eastern Conference, but Matt deserves this. He deserves to be playing for a team fighting for that number 1 spot. And that's exactly what Matt Freese is going to get in New York City. Matt Freese, I think, is a good goalkeeper. And it is unfortunate that he sat behind the best goalkeeper in MLS, in Andre Blake. And Jim's right. There comes a point where you can't continue to tell a player to be patient. Your time's going to come when you have a player like Andre Blake in front of you. And it's kind of the same thing with Stuart Finley, right? In last season, where he admitted it. He knew that Jacob Glesnes and Jack Elliott were the 2 best center backs in MLS. And there's nothing he can do about that. He tried to push, but when you are in front of the 2 very best players, it's kind of hard to break into the team. And again, it sucks that the Union are going to experiment with 3 in the back, because then that would have opened up more opportunities for Stu Finley, but that's neither here or there. Again, though, happy to see the team thank Matt Freese and say, look, you've meant so much to this organization. You've come through this organization at a young age, and you've developed into a fine player, and there's an opportunity now for you to go and win a number 1 goalkeeping spot. Then what better team to do that at than New York City, where I know they've had a slow offseason. Now they're finally starting to bring pieces in. They've won MLS Cup. They know what it takes to win MLS Cup. They know how to win playoff games. And I think that's a team where, is it crazy to say? Yes. But if Matt Freese develops enough, if he impresses enough with being in that City Footballing Group organization, could we see Matt Freese go to Man City one day and be the backup to Ederson? It's possible, right? I mean, Matt Freese, when he was young, had trials at Manchester United, so he is familiar with the English environment. But Matt Freese has to play with New York City first and show that he is a good goalkeeper, which I believe he is. But love to see the Union just continue to look out for the players, and I think you guys too. I think that puts a smile on your face, right? But the last thing that I want to talk about before I let you guys go is Jim Curtin was asked about the Apple deal plus the proposed playoff format. And if you guys don't have The Athletic, you're missing out. The Athletic's a great website. Paul, Sam, Pablo, they do a fantastic job covering MLS, bringing you guys the latest news. And so a report came out this week, I believe it was, or last week, from The Athletic that said sources provided The Athletic with an additional update this week saying that as part of the proposed shift to the best of three first round, MLS is also considering expanding the field to include 9 teams from each conference. If adopted, the 8th and 9th seeds would contest a play-in match, with the winner advancing to face the first seed from their respective conference in the best of three conference quarterfinals. This format would include a minimum of 25 playoff games. And so the first round of playoff games would be a best of three series, following by the rest of the playoffs going to just the one game playoff games that we're used to this whole season. And I have a lot of thoughts. I have a ton of thoughts, and we could be here for 40 minutes if I give you my thoughts on the whole playoff formation, 9 teams in each conferences making the playoffs. But I'll let you guys hear from Jim Curtin and his thoughts on the Apple deal and the potential 9-team playoffs per conference.
I have positive feelings on it. I'm excited by it. I believe in Apple, obviously, as a company. I don't think they make mistakes, and we're a league that they're showing a big investment towards. They need a certain amount of playoff games, the games of consequence. So I think they're being creative and trying to find ways to hit that threshold. Look, you're right. It does. In one way, it makes making the playoffs easier, by having 9, that's clear, right? That it sounds like a ton. But now if you're not one of those 9, it almost puts an alarm bell out that you should be fired. Like it gets dangerous too that way. You know what I mean? So it's not perfect. I don't know exactly what the final, format is. I know you probably have more information than even I do. I do hope it gets decided soon, because once the competition starts, I think you approach things differently when you know exactly how many are going to be in, and you make different moves, or you go after different games, or maybe you treat a Champions League game a little differently if you know how many teams are going to be in. So I think all that stuff has to be decided pretty soon and pretty quickly. I'm a guy who played in the old best of 3 days. That's how old I am. So in some way, I like those games because it had it turned into a rivalry during those 3 heated games. So there is a real positive to that if that's the way that it decides to go. You really got to know a team when you play them 3 times in a week consecutively, and I'll tell you what, you hate each other's guts by the end of that series, because you play each other in such quick succession. We had some bad ones with New England where, by the end of it, I'll just say we didn't like each other. So I think there's something in there. I think there's something that could be positive. So it's a tricky one, Paul. Until I know exactly what it is, it's tough to comment on, but it looks like it's going to be that 9. And it certainly is a lot of teams to qualify. I guess that's the message is you better get your team in there one way or the other, and that can add more pressure, which is a good thing, and accountability is good. But it's tough to really hammer down and comment on it because I don't know exactly, what it is just yet. I can say from the last 2 years, I think that they've been the 2 of the most exciting playoff series we've had as a league, and that's the one difficult thing to move away from now. But This is pro sports, and it's certainly bigger than any team or any silly coach's idea. So whatever happens, we'll be prepared for.
Yeah, I mean, right off the bat, right? 18 out of 29 teams making the playoffs, 62% of the league making the playoffs. I mean, that's a joke to me. 62% of the league making the playoffs. I mean, we've complained about it so many times where what's the point of the season? The regular season has no value. And we finally get the playoffs right, where the number one seed gets home field advantage. And we saw what the Union did with home field advantage, where they reached MLS Cup. All they had to do was win two games at home. And now they're in the MLS Cup final. And okay, yeah, I guess still you got to win that first of three series. And then if you're the first seed or second seed, then you're going to continue to host home games. But really, like this whole motion where, everybody deserves at least one home game. I mean, I think that's a joke to me, in my opinion. I mean, like Jim said, you just gotta make the playoffs now. And when you have 62% of the league, more than half of the league making playoffs, is it really that hard to make playoffs? As long as you make it, it doesn't really matter where you make it in. You're going to get a home game regardless. Then you've done a good job. Now anything can happen in the playoffs, right? But it just doesn't really sit right with me, where I feel like Jim said it too. The last 2 years of playoffs were the best playoffs this league's ever had. And I've seen people say it on social media too, where we finally get a product that works for the league. They know who they are, and this is exciting. Yeah, you only get, 13 games, I believe it is, in the playoffs, but at least the playoff format's easy to follow. At least we understand the playoffs, and not saying that we're not going to understand this format, but I think for your casuals, I think it's going to be a little confusing for them. And to see a best of three for Apple to say, look, we want more games, we want more meaningful games, then find ways to make the regular season more meaningful. And I get it. Playoffs is what it's all about for this league, because MLS Cup is the ultimate trophy. That's what teams thrive for. And so, in a sense, yeah, you do want to have as many playoff games as you can get, because that's where all the exciting soccer happens, or is supposed to happen. But, we saw plenty of exciting soccer in the regular season as Union fans. And it's, again, I told you guys, I could give you guys a ton of thoughts, and maybe we do another podcast when this does become finalized. I think that's what we're going to do, actually. I'll give more thoughts on it once we do have a finalized playoff format. But my initial thoughts, 18 out of 29 teams making the playoffs, too much. 62% of the league making the playoffs, too much. Like Jim said, if you don't make the playoffs, then there's a real argument to be made that you should be fired, where 62% of the league gets into the playoffs. But like Jim said, they're just stupid coaches. They doesn't matter what they say. It's pro sports, and the owners are the ones that are spending their money in this league. And at the end of the day, they're gonna do what's right for them to get more money. And so it sucks. It sucks that money is finding its way to destroy something that worked well. I believe in the Athletics article that they said that, the owners have to vote for this proposed format, but it does sound like that the owners want 9 teams per conference in the playoffs. And I guess if you're a team that's always been on the border of making the playoffs every single year, well, you add 2 more spots to the playoffs, well, then of course you'll be in favor for something like this. So more revenue for the MLS owners, more eyes on MLS for Apple, which means hopefully more people buy Apple's product. That's what Apple's hoping. but we'll save more thoughts for this topic when all this comes formalized. But again, just wanted to be transparent with you guys, let you guys hear some of Jim Curtin's thoughts from his press conference. And for all of you guys that have given me feedback from my podcast crossover with Kevin Kincaid, all the feedback that you guys have given me so far this season has been fantastic. I mean, the last 2 months, 2023 has been fantastic for me personally with the podcast. Done a lot of things that I didn't think I was going to do, whether that be at the convention, whether that be able to interview some of the people that I interviewed. Just really excited for this 2023 season for the Philadelphia Union, bringing you guys the best coverage that I can bring you guys. I do eventually want to make merchandise for the podcast, maybe more on that later on. I got to work with people, come up with designs, and so if that's something that you guys might be interested in, you can let me know on Twitter or something, and give me ideas, maybe things you guys want to see produced, and we'll start making merchandise eventually for the podcast, I think. I mean, we do have stickers, and I do have a whole bunch of coasters if you guys want them. I got them made for the convention and did not hand out all of them, so I do have a bunch of leftover if that's something you guys want. I can definitely meet up with you guys at Subaru Park. If you guys want me to ship you guys off some things, I can definitely do that too. But yeah, again, just so blown away by all the support you guys have given me over the years, especially the last 2 months. It's been very, I wouldn't say overwhelming. It's been a surprise just seeing how good 2023 has been for myself in regards to the podcast, and a lot of that's because of you guys. So thank you guys. I know I say it all the time, but for the support, for interacting with me. I did create a personal Instagram where I'll post, I don't know, probably fishing stuff, travel stuff, I don't know. So if you guys want to follow that, it's at It's a Todd's Life _ because of course somebody takes my personal Twitter handle where it's a Todd Life, but I didn't have to put the underscore because nobody took it. I thought it was a unique name, and then I go on Instagram and, oh, well, so much for this being unique. Somebody else already has this name, so I had to put the underscore. And if you guys aren't following the podcast, though, on Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter, follow @FreeKickPod, wherever you get your podcast, The Free Kick, and check out the website, thefreekick.net, which I think I eventually want to try to redo the website or something, get somebody to make it better than what it is, run a little bit faster than what it is. But that's a conversation again for another day. But the last thing that I want to do is give Jim a shout out at JimmyFC 2022. And if you guys aren't familiar with Jim, Jim was assigned a MLS team by the Extra Time podcast. They've done a segment the last 2 episodes where fans hit them up and ask Extra Time to pick them an MLS team. And so Extra Time gave Jim the Philadelphia Union as the team he should support. And so Jim posted about that on Twitter, and you guys started recommending him podcasts and everything, and a whole bunch of you guys recommended my podcast. And so Jim checked out the podcast, and I just want to say thank you, one, to Jim for listening to the podcast. Always great to have another Marylander on board the Philadelphia Union train. And 2, thank you guys for recommending the podcast to Jim. You couldn't have picked a better team, or I should say, you couldn't have been assigned a better team, Jim. And 2023 is going to be fantastic for the Union. A ton of competitions, and really, really grateful to have you on board the Philadelphia Union train. But until then, my name is Todd, and this is the Free Kick Podcast.